Eileen Harris. Did you read? No. It is, yes. Eileen? Oh, I can't see it all. Eileen Higgins is running for the County Commission seat 5. Just show. And we have 3 candidates who are here for the seat on the Florida legislative seat, which is going to be voted on. By the way, Eileen's in a race that is being voted on the 22nd of May, and it's mostly South Beach people, and I think most of you are, that is the district. So, the 3 candidates, ladies first, I saw Dee Dee Whitehorn. Where are you? Well, you can stand up, everybody might know you from the past on the commission. And Tubbs, so will you please go back and say your last name?
Tubbs Lol Chandani. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Now I'm going to introduce the panel. Where is he here? Michael? With Dee Dee and Tubbs. I'm going to introduce the panel as a whole. They are seated in the order that they're going to speak. But before that, we're going to have the mayor, who we didn't give a seat to because he has to be very shortly. So would you like to say a few words, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Which one of you was heckling me? Is that you, Ricky? Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks to Miami Beach United. I got to tell you, I really believe that an engaged electorate is the most important thing in a democracy. And in just a few years, you all have really elevated the marketplace of ideas in this city. And this is one of the examples of that. This is a great group you put together. I was supposed to fill in for Ricky, who wasn't going to be here. And then I discovered that apparently 14 years ago on today, my son was born. So I have a birthday party tonight. And Ricky, it turned out, wasn't traveling, so I'm actually really happy that you got the better end of the deal. I just want to say this about Arriola, so you get a sort of a broad view of what's about to happen in the city, and not just right here. You know, a couple of years ago, we had to change our roof. After about 20, 25 years, your roof goes, and you have to fix your roof. Sometime earlier, we had to redo and upgrade our electricity. If you think of a city as a capital asset, which really it is in many respects, you have to figure out what you need to do in the long term to protect your asset. And GeoBond really is about a city and a community deciding what it needs to fix, to upgrade, to address for the long term. Not just for that moment, but for the long term. And what we're about to embark on is first of all, a process by which we decide if we're going to obligate ourselves to make some of these upgrades. And secondly, what those upgrades are going to be. And the process, I can tell you, is going to be the following. It's going to be incredibly transparent. We are going to let the community not just watch it, but more importantly, be a part of it, to be the decision makers in it, to see the kinds of ideas and projects that are being brought up in North Beach and South Beach and Mid Beach, not just in one single area, but in all areas, not just in one single subject matter, but all. It'll probably be based in policing. It'll probably be based to a certain extent in parks. We'll also talk about resiliency and infrastructure. But you all are going to have to decide what your priorities are, what the priorities of the city are going to be in the medium and the long term. And this process is to give you that. It's to give you a chance to see what you'd like to spend your money on in the long term. And it's very important for a city that it makes those decisions transparently. And so I guess our commitment to you as your commissioners and your mayor is going to be that whatever we do, if we do something, it's going to be with not only with your consent, but from you. You're the power in this city. It's your money, it's your votes, and you're our residents. And we're not going to be making a decision without you. And that's what's going to happen now. And what you're going to see from this group here is they're going to give you different perspectives of this. You have folks from the city who are going to tell you the process from a very intricate basis. But most of all, I just wanted you to know from the big picture that we intend to make this the most transparent process you could imagine. And our doors are going to be open, our phones are going to be ready. Whatever you want to talk about, we're going to talk about. If you have ideas, we're going to want to listen to them. If you have criticisms, we're going to want to receive them. Because this is your city, and it's going to be your city for a long time. We want to make it the best place it can be. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.
So first, let me tell you the format here is going to be each speaker will speak 5 minutes, and they all have something different to say, a different part of what goes into making the GeoBond work, or at least so that you can be well informed. So the first speaker will be John Woodruff, who is the Miami Beach CFO, and he will be first. And we have Cesar Garcia-Pons, who is part of the Cesar-Pons and partners, friends, I don't know, associates, they're all the same. And he's going to give you a background on the GeoBond that was floated and put together in about 2002. It started in 1999, the idea, and it had to work its way through. So in 2002, I believe, is when the projects began. He's going to show you slides of what his company did as far as a lot of things you will recognize in the city that were paid for by the bonds that year. And he's going to show you before and after. I think it's fascinating to see what the city looked like before the GeoBonds. Next, Ron Starkman, who is the chair of the Miami Beach Budget Advisory Committee, and he will give you the perspective. That's a group of residents who have been appointed to that board. And then Commissioner Mark Sandelman, who is going to talk about what all these projects kind of are going to cost us. So you get a general picture of how broad this is and what kind of projects can possibly be done and how much we might be spending or not spending. Is that what you're talking about? And last, we have Commissioner Ricky Arriola, who is going to summarize the whole thing. How's that? He's chairman of the City Commission's Finance Committee, and he's here speaking on that behalf. So following the speakers, Tanya is going to take 2 microphones and run around here and get your questions and answers. This is really something that we want to hear from you. It's great for us to educate you on this end, but it's up to you and your questions how we will move forward. So enjoy the evening. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you again soon at our next events.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Okay, so I'm going to try to squeeze into my 5 minutes. What is a GeoBond? Why now? And what is the process? Because this is something that touches everyone in the community. Okay, so what is a GeoBond? I think there's some folks here who may, have no idea what we're even talking about. So a GeoBond stands for General Obligation Bond, and it's really a financing tool. So for a city, GeoBonds are one of the only ways to finance capital projects. So GeoBonds have to be approved through a voter referendum because the loans are paid back over 30 years through property taxes. So that's kind of what is implied in the general obligation. And so because voters have to vote for it, we go through a lot of process to make sure that we're getting the right kinds of projects into this bond program. GEO bonds are approved as separate measures of like projects, so that if you are voting on November 6th, you would potentially see that there's a list of projects under parks, there are projects under public safety, for example, and each one of those measures gets voted on individually. There's always a lot of questions about what would these bonds cost us as property owners, since they are paid back through property taxes. That amount will depend really on the total amount of the bond. Right now we're looking at a range of about $300 million to $500 million, and also on the timing of that debt issuance, because we're not going to borrow all that money up front. We would phase it in, and so as we're doing that, we would also try to mitigate that impact to property tax owners by trying to lower over time the operating millage rate, so that the net would be minimal increase to property owners. We won't know that cost impact really until we make final decisions at the end of July on the bond program. How much are we going to borrow, exactly how big is it? Okay, so why now? It's been almost 20 years since the last GEO bond program. It was approved in 1999. That bond was for almost $100 million. The city, since that time, has lots of needs for capital projects. Just to give you some quick examples, we need a new public radio system, super important. We need to replace some of our fire stations. There's a desire for some new facilities, enhanced parks, that kind of thing, resiliency projects. So in our normal checkbook to pay for these kinds of things, we have limited funds. We call them pay-as-you-go funds, and they're really limited to about $3 million a year. So what that really means is if we have a capital project that costs about $10 million, and we could set aside maybe $1 million a year, it would take 10 years to finally get that project done, right? Just like in your home, if you're trying to replace your roof, you would probably go ahead and finance that, not wait, until you have enough cash in order to be able to get that done. It turns out that now is a great time to take advantage of historically low rates. We think that if this is successful in the fall, we would go to the market in spring, and that we could probably sell these bonds around 4%. But we are in a rising rate environment, and so if we waited much longer, let's say we waited another year and rates went up another 0.5%, that could increase our debt service costs by $40 to $50 million, just to give you an idea. So that's really why we're here this year trying to get this done. Also, credit rating agencies are changing their criteria. And cities like Miami Beach, we're a coastal community, are expected to start addressing the effects of climate change. And if we don't start doing that, we could potentially face a downgrade. The city of Miami Beach is currently rated as AA+. That's one notch below AAA. The reality is that we probably never be rated AAA just because we are on a barrier island. So we have a great bond rating, and if we ever were downgraded, we could easily pay at least $8 million more in debt service costs, like interest costs, just to give you an idea. Okay, so what is the process here? So we kicked this off in January, and on April 5th, the Commission held a GEO bond workshop for an initial review of an unfiltered wish list of projects. Video and documents from that workshop are available on the website, geobond2018.com. And there's a nice mailer that's out up front here that you can pick up that has some information on public meetings, which I'm going to touch on quickly, and also the website itself. The projects were cut down at that workshop from $1.1 billion to about $700 million. It's very normal to have a large demand that greatly exceeds whatever you're going to end up getting a loan for. So upcoming, during May and June, the city will be holding 4 community meetings to learn about the proposed GEO bond program, and more importantly, get public input regarding prioritization of the project. So we have 4 meetings here scheduled, one in North, one in Mid, one in South, one also on the weekend for folks who can't come during the week. And the real format there is a workshop where you can come in, learn about the GEO bond, and then actually walk around the room, learning about some of the potential projects that are being considered, and rate them. So then that way we can take those ratings from everyone and rank and prioritize and come up with a final list of projects that we can recommend to the Commission in June and July, because by July 25th, we need to finalize what we're going to put on the ballot. So during August, September, and October, the 3 months before the vote on November 6th, the city will do extensive outreach to ensure voters are familiar with the projects and the process and so on. So that's just a quick overview. Covered a lot of ground there, but happy to answer more questions.
Thank you. So I get to stand up. My name is Cesar Garcia-Pons, and I have a presentation which I can only do from up here. So I'm going to show this, and hopefully the board can see it behind me. So as Nancy mentioned, I was a resident back in the 90s when we got together to think about how we wanted to improve our neighborhood. This was back in something that we called at the time a Flamingo Park neighborhood charrette. Some of you may have been there. This was at Fiber and Fisher, again, 20 plus years ago, where the now Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association got together and said, hey, we're residents, we need to see better stuff happening in our neighborhood. What is it that we'd like to see? And spent the day sort of thinking about things that we wanted, which is kind of what John mentioned now, that the city's already working on, a list of things that we wanted to see. It was an incredible time, we had a lot of fun, and it was really before the 99 GeoBond even went out. It was the impetus from the neighbors, from us, the residents, saying, you know, these are things that we need to see. There was a lot of deferred maintenance over the years of things that hadn't quite gotten done. So as Mayor Gelber said, when you replace your roof, you know, you either pay for it all at once, you pay for it in pieces, or you let it fall through. In the 90s, we were watching things deteriorate. We wanted to see them improve a little bit more. So this is sort of the framing of the conversation of when I started getting involved in this particular project, or these projects. One of the good things, and this, you know, I'm sure Commissioner Arriola is going to mention it on these other parts of these meetings, once you start moving forward with the GeoBond, or once you start moving forward with ideas, anything goes, right? This is a project that a friend of mine, a neighbor of mine, and myself sat down at that charrette on a napkin, and we thought of the Plaza España. Has anybody been to the Plaza España over in Española Way? Show of hands. Yes, yes. Come on, we live on the beach. Right? Everyone should have been there. And if you remember back then, it was asphalt and parked cars, and it was hot and miserable. And Española Way was just about to take off. So on the back of the napkin, we sort of sketched curbless, trees, parking, and the city at the time said, we don't even have to wait for a GeoBond for this. This is so small, we could do this right now. So they took this project and then slid it into their capital improvements and just built it even before the GeoBonds came on. So there's different layers of projects. These are the GeoBond projects that I think you're thinking of now, the larger projects. There are lots of smaller projects that come out of this process that can be built as part of that big process. They can also be siphoned out and done. And this is some examples of you know, again, for those who've been there, what this looks like. And it's amazing the transformation from what it used to be to what it looks and works like today. And again, that was a napkin sketch on a sheet of paper, one of these upcoming workshops, which was pretty fun. Another way is the North Beach Recreational Corridor, which you all know as the Atlantic Greenway Master Plan. This is a project that was alive for many, many years on the beach and never quite moved forward prior to the last bond. This is kind of a big project. And because of the GeoBond, they were able to really synthesize these ideas down and create or include this project that's been thought about for a long time in the last GeoBond. So part of the upcoming process is there may be projects in the works that you can't get off or that we can't get started on that we can just fold into this GeoBond and move forward. Sure, so I will. You're not meant to really see some of these maps, but I'm happy to do it. So this is part of the North Beach Recreational Corridor from Allison Park. You guys know where that is in the 50s on Collins Avenue, right against the water, all the way to 87th Avenue, which was the city limits, or heading right up to the open space park. And if you remember what it looked like, again, you can't see this image, but the one in the center here is what it used to look like. It used to look like this, which was leftover land, and it was sand and bushes, and it was really overgrown. So through a series of meetings and workshops that happened as part of the GeoBond, we were able to work with the community as a consultant, and then started design what these things wanted to look like. These were part of the initial conversations that we had with residents is, how would you like to see this? And it was the corridor itself, plus some of the parks that were adjacent to it, including Allison Park and Bandshell Park, which this is kind of a blow-up, and you can sort of see the form of the bandshell and some ideas of things that wanted to happen. Two of the things that actually got built was the senior center, which is that sort of hatched line there where the new building is. And then one of the things that didn't happen, which was the lifeguard stand, which is this piece over here, so you can actually have another one of the lifeguards with a tower overlooking the water. These are all ideas that came out of the charrette, and then what it may look like walking through the park itself. And even towards the north, on the Altos del Mar part, is what it would really look like without the buildings or when you have a single-family residential area. And this is what is there today. They built it. I mean, they built it almost exactly as we drew it. So those of you who are traveling on the North Beach Recreation Corridor, the Atlantic Greenway, it wasn't always there. And the Allison Park got built out wonderfully. The extension to the north got built out. It was a dune restoration project. This is up by Bandshell Park, again, a path and a dune restoration project. Very, very, very heavily and widely utilized. On the north part of Ocean Terrace, we didn't really get into Ocean Terrace, we just connected to the existing piece. And then moving up north into the area, the whole dune restoration project, and then right up at 79th Street, which was kind of the end where you would then transition into the North Shore Open Space Park. And none of this stuff was there before, and it was a project that was languishing, that was able to be included in the GEO bond, and actually was able to get implemented because of the 99 GEO bond. What's done a little bit differently then than today is back then we did projects by neighborhoods, not by project types. That's something interesting that I'd love to get into conversation with the panel later, but one of them, the largest one that we worked on, was the Flamingo Park neighborhood. This was between 5th and 6th Street up to Lincoln Lane South, from Alton Road over to the water, and we were given a pot of money, I'm going to get it wrong, I'm going to say $9 million, it was probably $20 million, and said, solve everything, and then let's see what we can get done. So what we did is we went with a series of public workshops and really on-the-ground studying. We walked every street, looked at every single thing, and came up with what we called a vision plan. If we had everything that we ever wanted to have, this is what we'd look like. And we came up with 30 different recommendations of all different types, streets, buildings, signage, I mean, all possible things we could look at. And ended up saying this is what we'd like to have. I'm going to show today just 3 projects, which are the ones with little red circles on them. And in the end, we were able to fund, this is what we call the unfunded plan, we were able to fund 9 projects out of the 30. So part of the process, I think, is part of the visioning process, is what do we want, and then how do we get to what we want to get to. So some of the simple things, traffic calming. You guys remember this is the corner of Meridian and 9th Street. If you cross those streets in that neighborhood, it usually cut through traffic was the issue from 6th Street, plowing through the neighborhoods and then trying to get off so they have to go in the traffic on Washington. So you come up with these traffic calming intersections, and this is one of them that was built out, very simple, just sort of extending the bump out so that we can have shorter crossing distances and provide more green space in the areas. This is one of several that were built in that neighborhood. It was one of the priorities from the neighborhood at the time. Some other ones are things that we, as residents, knew about that nobody else knew about, and I wish I'd updated pictures, which I don't, but this is Española Way, 14th Lane, which is what we call the beach shortcut from Washington to the beach. Before this was done, and now it's very different from this, it was an asphalt pavement with potholes, and it was really ruddy and not very well done. So we moved on to say, let's light it, let's improve the paving, and let's add more things to it. This was phase 1 of the implementation. I understand now it's all redone, and I don't have pictures of it, but now that was complete. It only took about 20 years. Other traffic calming, and this is sort of at the intersection of Collins and 9th Street. The idea of greening the area, if you remember that, is lots of asphalt. So we put in these sort of bump outs, added some landscape and shortened the crossing distance to get a little bit of green and a little bit of safety in there as well. Another neighborhood which actually got built out more completely is the Ocean Front neighborhood. This was like 24th Street to 29th Street. And again, the street, this was sort of the charrette drawings that we had done back in the day. You can see signage was a part of it, landscaping was a part of it. And these are the before pictures. And if you look, if you can see them, on the bottom left was really the situation. It was asphalt from wall to wall, and and then parking sort of haphazard, and it was really kind of a mess. And these were our residential gateways into the neighborhood. Through a series of charrettes with the public, we were able to transform what that was into this here. And this was the second largest neighborhood. And the budget here went from $4 million. We were able to allocate a couple more $1 million, and in the end, we were able to spend $7 million in order to implement these street ends, which is, again, our gateways to the beach, which were in incredibly bad shape, and now are hopefully still in good shape. I haven't been out there in a little while. From minor to major ones, like you see 29th Street. Extended over to Beach Walk 2. This is south, this is 5th to 2nd. It's an extension of the Bay Walk down to the south. These are the really big drawings showing the relationship of the buildings to the bay. You're not meant to really see or understand all of this stuff, but it was a large series of drawings with a lot of public input, with very specific intent as to how to get to this here. And again, if you remember that other picture of the sand and the sort of overgrown dunes, this is what we're able to transform it into. This was a built and design project that was only possible through the GeoBond project. And then lastly, this wasn't a GeoBond completely funded project, but it actually shows, in this GeoBond, I said there's some sort of digital wayfinding as part of it. But you guys may remember this project was a signage project, which was done in 2004. We went through many meetings for this sort of signage plan, and came up with these kind of elements, which you see all around the city now. Some of which that were thought of in the charrettes and then were executed very well and are now part of our signature pieces. Some of which were built and are now missing. This is the gateway on North Beach, which I understand was taken out by an automobile. But it was really beautiful, and hopefully there's going to be another one very beautiful soon. And then some things that were never quite built, that we really imagined thinking about the big picture thought of what Miami Beach would look like on the causeway. So what I thought would be interesting about these things is not only do we need to repair our roofs and build our fire stations, but I think this is an opportunity for you to improve the quality of life for you as residents, whether they be gateways that you walk through, or improve the vision of what Miami Beach is. That's something that you can do as part of this process in conjunction with whatever the projects are happening with. And then hopefully you guys can get together and, like we did in 1996 in a small group of residents at Feinberg Fisher, you can do the same thing as part of this process and get the neighborhood that you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So my name is Ron Starkman, and I'm here representing the city's Budget Advisory Committee. And we are a group of residents with financial backgrounds, CFOs, accountants, financial advisors, financial analysts, and so forth, that are appointed by the commissioners to advise them on issues related to the city's operating and capital budget. But we also get involved in other financial matters, such as the management of the pension funds and debt issuance. So naturally, we're keenly interested in the GeoBond. As part of our process, we meet at least monthly with the heads of the various departments, the chief of police, the head of the fire, public works, and so forth, to review in some detail their budget. So we have a pretty good feel for what the needs of the city are in terms of funding its infrastructure and operations. We've looked at the analysis that was prepared by the city's financial staff, and we agreed with the staff that the city has the debt capacity to issue some general obligation bonds. The numbers that have been batted around have been in the 300 to 500 million range. Though as of now, as John said, they're working their way down from $1 billion to about 800 million, so they haven't quite gotten down there. But we are very confident that an issuance in that range would not impair the city's stellar credit ratings, which is a AA plus, are among the highest of any municipality. Now, while we agree that the city has the capacity, our concern is that the money is spent where it is most needed to protect our infrastructure, and enhance the quality of life. We would not like to see this become somewhat of an open checkbook, and we as a committee have a fair amount of independence. We're not running for election, we don't have constituents emailing us with their pet projects, so we're going to look at the list of projects very much through a set of, you might say, green eye shades, though we are all residents, so we do care about quality of life, but we're being a bit more neutral, and we're going to weigh in on those projects as we see them from our perspective. One of the other things we'll be considering is the operating and maintenance costs of what is being built. It's one thing to raise the money through a bond to build a new park, but then it has to be maintained on an ongoing basis, and that also has implications for the budget. So some projects will be much more maintenance and operations intensive than others. And the last comment, although John did a very good explanation of what a geobond is, but most of the bonds that the city issues and has issued are what they call revenue bonds, in that those bonds are backed by the revenues from a particular project, like a stormwater project might be backed from the stormwater revenues. A parking garage might be backed by the revenues from the parking garage. But a geobond, and investors in those cash flows occur. If for some reason parking garage doesn't generate enough revenue, the city doesn't then obligated to pay back the bond. So with the general obligation bond, though, that means that we are in effect the lender of last resort. We are guaranteeing those bonds through our tax base, which is why it does go out for a vote. But the general obligation bonds we should look at as something as a very precious asset that should be used sparingly for the kinds of projects that we could not otherwise fund, and which will, ideally provide value either through increased property values or substantial increase of property in quality of life for residents. So that's all I have to say.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Samuelin, honored to be on this illustrious panel here. For many of you may know, I served as past president of Miami Beach United. So as you know where I come from, I'm someone that has the residents' interest at heart, as I'm sure my colleagues do. And I'm a former business executive. I'm honored to serve with Commissioner Arriola as vice chair of the Finance Act. So that's sort of the orientation I bring to this discussion. In a nutshell, I do believe that we need a geobond, and we need to make sure it's done right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we need it, how it might be done, and importantly, the critical role that residents will play to make sure that it's done right. If you look at the city and you say, why haven't our street lights been taken care of? Why haven't the streets been improved? Why isn't that new park been done? I think John put it well, that frankly we've not had the capital for these big projects. Do we have money to pay our employees? Do we have money to operate the city as it is today? We do. But for the truly important, longer-term major projects, we simply do not have those funds. And as I believe was previously mentioned, the last time we did this goes back to 1999. So for me, not only is it an investment in our future, it's potentially an opportunity to enhance our quality of life and do good for the community, which ultimately will make the community more important and valuable, and hopefully for property owners more valuable as well. How and what are the costs like in this? First off, what we're going through is a process of particular projects, and this is where residents play a role. We have needs in a few different areas. I would touch on a few. Parks, public safety, transportation, and infrastructure. We could go on for a while. We've got the big long list here, but I would just say a few. The Par 3 is a project that residents have been crying for years, and we have a beautiful design coming, but we don't have the funds to make that happen. That is an example of what the geobond could do. I spend quite a bit of time with our police force. I like to say that public safety is job one for local government. I'll be with our police force tomorrow for a good part of the morning. And I can tell you, so many times I hear, we caught the bad folks because of this technology such as cameras and license plate readers. And I said, boy, can we have those in more places? And they said, well, we don't have the funding for that. I said, we need that because we need to make sure we're delivering for our residents. I'm a walker. Before living here, I lived in a very walkable town. That's where many of us are here. But we don't have the sidewalks in place. We don't have our crosswalks. We don't have the lighting that we need in a lot of cases because we haven't had the investment funds. So we need to improve mobility, including for pedestrians. And finally, a near and dear term to my heart is our whole effort around sea level rise and resiliency. We do have funding that has gotten some projects going, but I will be honest, we are going to need more. And particularly as we go into some neighborhoods with these projects, we need to make sure that we do what's necessary below the ground and above the ground, that we leave these neighborhoods even looking better than they were before. So with these type of projects coming together, basically after we go through the prioritization, we're going to end up at some number. You've heard the round numbers, whether it's 300 million, 500 million, and then we'll figure out what extra costs that will involve. And then that would be done on an annual basis per property owner. So property owners would be asked to pay a little more for this. And what I would tell you is that commercial property owners and those who own the most expensive homes will clearly pay a larger than average share. That's just the way the math will work. These costs will be spread out over many years, 30 years. So people who don't live here today, they will also pay. So that's a little bit about the cost and the mechanics. Now I said we should do it, and we should do it right. So what does doing it right look like? Well, for me, doing something right like this is always about doing it together and doing it with the strong voice of the residents. So your voice in some of the sessions that are coming out, helping to prioritize some tough trade-off decisions, because as John said, we're still probably higher than we need to be. You're going to have to help shape what you think makes sense. Making sure that we have, and this was just brought up by Ron, because he's got those very good green eye shades, that we are understanding the implications from an operating cost. Because each of these big projects, you pay for the project, but then you need the park rangers in the park. You need the maintenance to make it work. We wanted to make sure that's done right. So resident engagement up front and throughout the process will be critical. But it doesn't end with the ultimate decision by the community, because ultimately you'll decide. I believe there's an important role for oversight once these projects have actually been laid out. And I think there's a clear example. When the city of Miami this fall decided to proceed with their own GEO bond, they agreed on a $400 million investment. What they did is they set up a 7-member citizen oversight committee. And I think we could use this. I actually think we can elevate our performance in capital projects by more community input, more transparency. So I am personally going to advocate strongly that we have that type of mechanism in place as oversight. Finally, and I'll leave you with this thought, you also recall another important initiative the city's been talking about is an independent inspector general. An independent inspector general was a very important topic on the campaign trail. And as you may recall, that deals with waste, fraud, and abuse. What a beautiful use of an independent inspector general to make sure any funds that are being spent for the GEO bond are being done right. And indeed, you may have the opportunity to vote on that initiative at the same time. And I think the two sort of go hand in hand. So I look forward to the discussion, and I'll hand it over to my esteemed finance colleague, Commissioner Arriola.
Great job, Mike. So one of the nice things, or not so nice things about going last is all the good ideas and comments have already been used. So I'll try to add something new to this. I think Mark did a really great job of telling us, some of the safeguards that are going to be built into the GEO bond, both the inspector Director General, which I also support, as well as a GeoBond Oversight Committee, which I also support. Those are the best practices. So I think those are going to be really instrumental to having a successful bond program. Ron laid out a really good additional oversight. His budget advisory committee is really, really top notch. Some great professionals there, and they keep us honest. Cesar laid out what a charrette process might look like. I think we're going to very much mimic that this go around because it worked well last time. And then, of course, John, who really is a tremendous CFO, and I mean this sincerely, I really enjoy working with John, laid out basically what a geo bond is. So what I'll do is try to tell you sort of the vision where I come at it. To me, this is the single most important thing, maybe besides a couple of the governor election that we're going to vote on in November. I think it's the single most important thing to me that I'm focused on in 2018, because this is the thing that, if it passes, can really help further transform Miami Beach. We have a number of urgent priorities that need funding, and really the best mechanism for doing that is a geo bond. And I remember when Mark, you were running, and Dan was running for mayor, really one of the first questions I asked you, I said, how do you feel about a general obligation bond? Because I only want to support and work with people who are willing to do something that politically is very tough to do, and that's raise taxes, to ask voters, we're going to have to raise your taxes, but here's what we're going to do with the money. The nice thing about geo bond is voters get to vote on it, and you get to decide whether you're going to tax ourselves on this. But it's not very popular with politicians, and it's obvious why. But in order for us to do our job well, you have to have the courage to speak to voters and say, look, we have these needs, they're urgent, and we believe it is in the best long-term interest of our city if we do this. We're going to do it prudently, we're going to do it via a lot of community outreach. It's going to be, as the mayor said, very transparent, almost obscenely transparent, how we're going to do this. And I think that's what voters deserve. The federal government has the luxury of running deficits. Municipal governments, state governments don't have that. We are required by law to balance our books and not run deficits. And because of that, we're very limited in our ability to finance certain projects. And so whenever we want to do something massive like this, we have to go to voters with a general obligation bond in order to do that. I remember when I was running the first time, one of the things people would say to me, what's your vision for Miami Beach? I said, look, among the visions that I have for Miami Beach and my commitment that I will always strive when I'm making decisions, I want Miami Beach to make those top 10 cities in America to live. They're published by various news outlets. And in order to make that list, we have to invest in our community. Things like parks, education, safety, roadways, etc. And if we're going to live up to that vision and that goal of trying to be one of the top 10 cities to live in America, we have to invest. I am troubled when I travel internationally and see how far America has fallen behind other countries in its infrastructure, whether it's airports, mass transit, what have you. And I never want to see that for Miami Beach. I always want to see Miami Beach as being one of the most beautiful, pristine, progressive, enlightened, smart cities in America. And I believe that this general obligation bond is going to help us achieve that. It's going to help us make it through the 21st century. A lot of the money will go to resiliency, but a lot of the money will also go to our parks, to public safety, and those kinds of needs. So I think when the final tally is done, we're probably going to be on the higher side of the 300 to 500 million range. For the reasons being, there's a lot of priorities, and this process is very long, cumbersome, and expensive to do. So we might as well just try to get it done now, so we don't have to do it for another 20 years. The interest rate environment is very favorable. The demand on Wall Street is very high, and Wall Street has already told everybody that the resiliency program of the city is going to be used as a criteria for their credit rating. So by investing in our city's resiliency program, which is part of the bond, we'll be able to maintain our AA+ rating, which lowers our borrowing costs and basically keeps our finances in check. So I look forward to this discussion and the many dozens we're going to be having over the many months to come. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for those great overview points and positions and statements. Okay. Be patient. We've got a lot of questions. Even I have questions, which I know is shocking to those who know me. Let's see. We'll go right here to the middle. Frank.
Hi, Frank Delvecchio. I was on the original GeoBond committee in 1999 for 6 years. In the interest of transparency, I have some wonky questions, but they're important. The first is, what are eligible costs under the GeoBond program? That is, what can you spend GeoBond money on? Trees, parks, concrete. What are the ineligible costs that are associated with each expenditure? You mentioned the GeoBond can build a park, but park maintenance is implied. You mentioned that a GeoBond could put up investigatory cameras that will then be operated by the police. There's a durational life, and there are additional costs. So what's eligible, what is not eligible, and will the cost, the ineligible cost associated with each capital item be calculated, and will the public be shown those estimates? So you see the GeoBond park, $1 million, maintenance and park rangers for 30 years, $250,000. Then will you tell us how that ineligible but associated cost will be paid for? Thank you.
John, why don't you walk us through what is eligible and ineligible? I know many of the things that are ineligible, and I think I know many of the ones that are eligible. You might have that list better than I, but I'll answer Frank's political question. Will we show you the sort of the ongoing maintenance costs of this investment? And the answer is yes, we will. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Those are great questions. What are eligible costs? I think the simple way of thinking about it, that brick and mortar costs are really what we're talking about, capital related costs. Sometimes there's a little gray area there, but I think that's the simple way of thinking about it. Ineligible costs, I think you made a good example of the ongoing maintenance for a facility. So for instance, if we build a library, for example, you can build a facility, you can put all the books in it, you can buy the tables and chairs, all those can be capitalized. But the librarians and the other folks, they can't be capitalized, right? And so those would need to come from the ongoing ongoing operating budget. And so those are the kinds of things that as we get closer to a final list, and definitely after we have the final list, it takes a lot of time, frankly, to dig into those and identify all those costs, but we will, and we'll have them very clearly laid out, because one of the main things we need to do as we get closer to implementation is the sequencing of those projects for a lot of different reasons. One of them being, okay, what can we absorb through the normal, let's say, growth in the budget? Where are we going to have tight spots? So, how can we grow into this, for example? So, when we're renovating an existing facility, for example, oftentimes we actually save money because ongoing maintenance costs are reduced. Anytime we open a brand new facility, those are really the areas to watch for where we can experience higher costs.
So if I could just build on that just for the non-Excel spreadsheet fans in the room. If you build a facility, the attendant costs then get built into the budget going forward, the city operational budget. It's not sort of a set aside from the GeoBond. It's put into the budget going forward, the operating budget. Okay. More questions? Thank you.
Hello, Ray Breslin. You see this beautiful street out here? Last GeoBond. And how did it happen? I took pictures from the top of the roof of the Mantel Plaza of the swale that all the cars were parked in, the mud. I took pictures of a Jewish couple walking down the middle of the street, 3 of those sidewalks, going to shul, and I went down to the city. And I said, I live in Miami Beach. This doesn't look like Miami Beach. Next thing I know, they sent a neighborhood resource person out to talk to me, Lynn Bernstein. Said, you're lucky. We have a GO bond we just passed. And you could go down and make a presentation. I go down and make the presentation. $900,000 gets allocated to this neighborhood. I said, wow, you go and ask the city for what you want, and you get it. What a great city I live in. Well, then I got asked to partake in the first Leadership Academy, and an activist was born. President of the College Park Neighborhood Association, and now I'm very happy for what went on, and you guys will all have the opportunity to partake. Thank you.
Mike Barronell lives out the Fifth. Just quick, easy question, I think, hopefully. How much of the last bond is unpaid? Was that a 20 or a 30 year? And what will happen? Is there any refinancing? Or, I mean, rates are low. Maybe the rates are lower than they were in '99. Is that a possibility?
Sure. The last issuance of bonds was in 2003, so they were passed in '99. The first was in 2000, and then another issuance in 2003. So if you add 30 years to that, in 2033, we'll have them completely paid off. We currently pay about $6 million in debt service. A year, yes. And as far as is it a good time to refinance? We would normally be refinancing those bonds right now. It would make more sense to refinance them as we issue the new bond, so that way we can level out some of that debt and try to smooth in the impact to property taxes. So we're going to wait and see, and if the bond is passed, it would probably be, we would refinance the existing bonds at the same time.
Again, just for the non-Excel fans, that would be a separate item that would not be part of the GO bond. It would be rolled into the GO bond, the refinancing.
Sorry, I was asking.
Sorry.
So again, for the non-Excel fans here in the room, that would be a separate item. It wouldn't be part of the GO bond that would be set aside for the refinancing, or
the refinancing wouldn't need a voter referendum at all.
It's not new debt.
Yeah, it's not new debt, so that wouldn't be an issue.
it would just be concurrent to take advantage of that.
And I think part of the question too was, is there any leftover funds from the original bond? Very little. We're finishing spending it up because you can't actually go into the bond market and borrow more GO bonds if you haven't spent the old ones. So that's a question that I know I've had to answer before, so I want to throw that out there as well.
So if you're spending money from the last bond, what's being built or created with that money from the last bond?
We have a long list of the projects that were constructed with the prior bond, and we're going to be adding that to the website in the next few days, actually.
Thank you guys for being here. My name is Alfredo, and I'm the Associate Executive Director of Miami City Ballet. And I was just wondering how to get a project up there. And then you mentioned having voters kind of vote on it. And you know, we have some needs for the building, especially with all the renovations taking place around it in the neighborhood. But we need boring things that are very important, like a new roof, which is not a sexy project like the one out here, which looks beautiful. So I'm just concerned about that side, where there are certain capital improvement needs that are not maybe as attractive.
I believe that we have a project right now that's being considered for roof replacements for cultural facilities, and I believe the Miami Beach Ballet is on there. But let's pretend for a second that voters don't feel that that's something, like you said, sexy enough for them to want to vote for it. Well, if we were able to free up some money that we normally would be spending on, let's say, a park enhancement, that now we could use the GO bond, we would have the capability then to do more of those normal maintenance type projects, if you will.
In our operating budget.
Yes, in our operating budget.
And and what about, so the other question was, how do we present a project if it's something new?
Email us or come to these community charrettes. Yeah, that's why we're doing these things, because even though most of these lists have come from previous discussions over the years with different homeowner association meetings and just lots of meetings and emails over the years, we know that this list is not exhaustive of the community's wants and needs. So during the charrette process, there are definitely things that we might not have considered. So that's the time to get the ideas in.
Right, at these workshops, for example, you'll be rating the existing projects that we have, but you'll also have the opportunity to comment, add projects, increase the amount on this one, anything like that. So we want to get as much public input as possible.
Good evening, Jerry Libben, 30-year resident in North Beach, 32 years in Miami Beach, and currently the CEO of Miami Beach Chamber of Commerce. I just want to tell a little bit of a story like what Ray said, to kind of echo how important it is and the opportunity that every one of us has to have an important input into this process. Back in 1999, or maybe between 96 and 99, when the plans were reformulated for that bond offering, originally, I may not be the exact number, but originally it was a $50 million bond offering, not 90 or 95 that it ended up. And I happen to have been president of my homeowners association at Normandy Isle, and what was being proffered at the time was, give or take, $20 million was going to be spent in South Beach, $15 million was going to be spent in Mid Beach, and $7 million was going to be spent in North Beach. And I contacted Ted Berman and Mike and all the other presidents of the homeowner associations in North Beach and said, guys, we're going to fight this because we're getting shafted. North Beach has to be treated equally. And because we spoke up, the city redid the entire plan. And it ended up 15 million in Mid Beach, 15 million in South Beach, 15 million in North Beach, and these parks and whatnot, and they ended up increasing the bond offering to 90 or 95 because we added some things. The reason I'm telling you that is because you have an important opportunity. Don't squander it. The committee, you don't live in a more, you don't have the opportunity in any other city like you have here. Our commission and our administration listens, and you really have a chance to participate, so take advantage.
I just want to pick up at Jerry's comments are right on, and John alluded to, but literally in the next 30 days, we have a little flyer here. There are 4 major public sessions where you can have the type of input that Jerry talked about. If you're part of a community group or a neighborhood association, you think, hey, my neighbors would like to hear it, send a request to us. We'll be glad. I'm sure we'll find someone to get out and meet with you. And if you just have an idea, like the Miami City Ballet, Commissioner Arriola and myself, we're here. So we want to make this a very interactive process. But I would say now is the time to get those ideas on the table, because this is a real opportunity to make the investments we have for our community in the long term.
Starkman, Sunset Harbor Neighborhood Association. I think what many people are going to want to know as residents is how the bond will affect our property taxes. So you have a scope right now, $300 to $500 billion. What will that do to our tax rates? And will you be able to present that at the same time as you do these charrettes? Thank you.
Yeah, let me take a shot at that, and our trusted CFO will make sure if I say something I shouldn't. So the short story is we're going to add up all the projects, get to whatever number that is, and then we are saying as a community, do we want to invest? And so yes, that involves an increase in taxes. The rough math, as I would describe it, is we're talking about property owners, commercial property owners, and clearly those who have the most sizable assets are going to pay a disproportionate share. But if you want to say, hey, what's this really mean? I'm going to rough out some numbers. For every $100,000 of value in your home, your property tax. Thank you. For every $100,000 of tax assessed value. So if you look at your statement, for every $100,000, we're talking about roughly $100 per year. So if you have a condo that's worth $300,000 tax assessed, go to your tax form, not what it's worth, then you're talking about $300,000. If you happen to have a $500,000 tax assessed value, you're talking in rough numbers, probably a little below $500,000. If you happen to own $1 million property tax assessed, that's $1,000, and that would be the annual increase cost. John, anything you want to pick up on that?
I think that's a nice, simple way to think about it, but what I would also add is that we wouldn't do that day one. In other words, we're going to take, let's say, a $500 million loan day one and have to pay on that. We would phase that in over a period of at least, I'd say, 5-6 years minimum, and that there would be a stair-step effect And more than likely, as time would go on, we would try to lower the operating millage rate to help compensate at least for a portion of that. So when will we have a better idea of what that impact is? By the end of July, beginning of August. So we don't have that right now. I could meet with someone and talk them through some potential scenarios, but we would work really hard to smooth that in, if you will, over a period of time to help mitigate that impact.
Also, in your calculation, when you're thinking about making a decision whether to support this or not, and what this is going to cost you from a tax perspective, it's very important to keep in mind the cost of doing nothing. So if we don't do this, what might happen to our city? For example, crumbling infrastructure over the next 30 years. Is that going to be good or bad for your property value? I would argue it's bad. So you might be paying a little more in taxes, but hopefully your home is appreciating in value because of that investment. If we don't make investments in our infrastructure, an argument can be made that your property values will start to decline. It's also, I think, not too much of a stretch to say that this investment in our community not only will increase your property values over the long term, but may one day in the future result in just us dropping our millage rate because it attracts additional investment, additional tourist dollars to our city, which frees up money that the city can use and possibly lower our millage rate in the future, which we have done successfully for the past several years because our economy has been strong locally.
Just to add to that, we are at our lowest millage rate that we've ever seen. So the commission's done a great job of lowering that millage rate over the last several years.
David Wallach. I've been a resident and working on Miami Beach since 1955. I think your battery is going on this. But is there a master list? The battery's going. Is there a master list? I heard there's a master list, a wish list, or whatever you would call it. But it's at the Ocean Drive Association. They have not seen it, and I have not heard of it. My question, I would love to see it, and I know others in the community would love to. My question is, a couple of years ago, from 5th to 15th Street was discussed for a full renovation for Ocean Drive, and it was discussed for months, and it even went to the planning board, and the design was unanimously approved by the planning board, I believe it was. And my question is it on this list that I've heard about for the restoration and renovation of Ocean Drive?
So that's a great question that illustrates the point. The answer, David, yes, that is on the list right now. Whether it remains on the list will be dependent on how successful you and the Ocean Drive folks and the community are in saying that that's a priority for us to invest in. But right now, that has been scoped. It's on the list. It has not been eliminated. But part of the charrette process is going to be exactly that. Do we believe that a $10 million or whatever renovation of Ocean Drive is warranted, and do we as taxpayers want to put that as a priority over other things?
I understand. Is that list available for us?
Yeah.
Or?
So the list that was circulated at the GeoBond workshop is actually available on the website under documents and the GeoMB2018.com. So I encourage you to grab one of these, if nothing else, so you can get the website. And also you can sign up for email information, and you can request a speaker to your group. And if you do come to one of the 4 workshops that we're having in the community, you'll see all the latest version of the project list as well. Because every single project will have a description and will be up where everyone can rate it so that we can try to prioritize.
I actually have a kind of a related question. Mark, you gave some figures which I assume are based on a GeoBond of a certain size, right? What was that, a $500 million?
Yes, I took the, I did 5, just to take the high side and be upfront about it.
Right. So, are we thinking of coming up with just a one number that's saying, okay, voters, here it is, $500 million, here are the projects, take it or leave it? Or are we thinking about maybe saying, okay, here's $250 million worth of projects, if that's all we have to spend, we approve that, or $500 million if you are willing to pay more?
Thanks for that, Ron. What I would say is that we're really doing this in a bottom-up way. We don't really have a set number in mind. So we've got a list of projects, and we're going to the community, and we're probably going to add, edit, delete based on what the community thinks. And then sort of we're going to have to look at where did those priorities land? Or sort of in round numbers, what number does that get to? In terms of splitting it, while possible, I would say right now that's not sort of the current thinking, because there's a significant amount of time and energy that goes into the planning. There's outside counsel. We're having sessions like this. So there's a certain cost to doing this. So it probably makes sense to do it in one fell swoop. But in terms of how big it's actually going to be, it's going to depend on what we hear from the community.
Ron, I also think your question was, is this going to be one ballot question or, yeah. So what we've been told, so meaning, will it be one ballot question, hey, do you want this $300 million or $500 million geo bond? What we're told by our city attorney is that, by law, the ballot question can only have one single subject matter, meaning the recommendation he's making is that this will be possibly 3 ballot questions, 3 different tranches. One would be, say, public safety, $100 million. Parks and whatever, another $100 million. And then public safety, another tranche. So sort of categorize them so people know exactly what they're voting on. So it's conceivable that 2 out of the 3 blocks would pass, but certainly we would hope all 3 would pass. But I think right now we're talking about 3 categories, which I believe is what we did in '99. Is that true, Cesar?
Correct, and I think it's an important part. In '99, there was 2 bonds. There was an infrastructure bond and an above-ground bond, so essentially below ground and above ground. The $92 million was an above-ground bond. The underground bond was more. It was more money because it cost more money to do infrastructure. And what was great about that is that you weren't able to pull money from one to the other, which meant that the capital improvements, the stuff above ground that we like to see, was not able to be sucked underground to pay for all the very expensive infrastructure, and vice versa. So that's actually a really great thing to hear, that you'd be able to tranche them out. One thing, and I'm sure maybe mention it again later, is within each of these tranches, there's going to be a list of projects, and as the commissioners both said, you're working now to select what those different ones are. My caution to you and, of course, the commission is, it's hard to get those numbers right. In all of the geo bonds I've been a part of over the many, many years, none of us have ever gotten it right. And it's just because it's hard to do once you dig a hole in the ground. Unforeseen conditions become different. So I'm not sure how it's going to be written into the language, and really the sort of animosity with these geo bonds comes when you promise to get A, and you can't go A through C, or excuse me, A through F, and you can only get A through D. I think that's going to be the hardest part for this part of the session, is the visioning plan, that everything you want is the best part of the process, and then the siphoning down to a list of projects that you're going to try to accomplish, and I use the word try to accomplish, is the next most important thing. And then the most important thing is the prioritization of those projects. So you can have a list from A to Z, and you can only afford A to Q. As long as you all agree that A to Q are the top ones, you're not going to be upset when you only go A to N, because it's going to be really hard, in my experience, to get them all in there.
I'd just like to add that one of the things we're going to try to do differently this time around is create more capacity in our operating checkbook, if you will, to be able to afford, more, so that if a project comes in, let's say after it's all said and done, $2 or $3 million over whatever was approved to the geo bond, that we would still have the ability to go ahead and get that done and not have to wait and wait around trying to save up money to be able to finally finish it, or have to sacrifice another project in order to get that done. So that's something that we're going to be working on as well.
Jack Johnson, representative of the Flamingo Park Neighborhood Association and a member of the board of Miami Beach United. My question is, of the list of projects that's being considered, what percentage are related to resiliency, sea level rise, and other resiliency issues? And are those projects going to receive priority?
Did you hear the end of that question? Are those projects going to receive priority? Was the end of that question?
I think it was a two-parter. Are they going to get priority, and then what percent? Let me take the second, and John, maybe you could weigh in on the first. In terms of the resiliency projects, I do believe they're quite important to what we're talking about. And there are a couple different aspects of the resiliency project. There's sort of the below ground infrastructure, seawall, some of those elements which are part of it. But there's also the above ground neighborhood enhancements. And I think we all recognize that sea level rise is an important priority. We're going to need to address it. And so I think the priority will be on both. That we have the infrastructure in place so that we look forward to our second 100-year celebration. We just did our 100-year, but that we all can look forward to that day and that we live a high quality of life as we go forward. But that we also have the funds to beautify our neighborhoods, the landscaping, the walkability, that you bring art into this design. And that's something that I think is an important opportunity. I will tell you today, without a GeoBond, when we proceed with our resiliency projects, we'd probably be left to leave the neighborhoods largely as they are today. These funds that are in the GeoBond are going to allow us to take our neighborhoods to another level when the projects take place. So I'll bounce the first part of the question over to John if he has a round number for the resiliency piece.
Right now it's a moving target because the list is moving quite a bit, and we're also trying to beef up the resiliency piece and find the balance of how to integrate them with a lot of the projects. Oftentimes, you know you want to do a project, you just may not be sure exactly right now, looking ahead in the future, of what the resiliency element might be. So we're looking at different ways of doing this, maybe having a resiliency kind of program project where we can go to it and maybe have, let's say, $20, $25 million in it per se. And then as we build different facilities and different elements, we can potentially pull from it to round out what would normally just be a normal, let's say, gray infrastructure project with a lot of those green type elements that we've been hearing a lot about.
Thank you. My name is Orica Castillo. I have a quick question. I wonder if part of the process of choosing the different projects, have you considered involving some private companies to sponsor, for instance, a corridor sponsored by the Westin Hotel or something like that? I don't know if that might be something that you have considered into the process.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, good question. The answer is yes. I mean, I think there's already a couple of opportunities of the projects that are in this list where there have been a couple of private companies who have come to us and said, well, we can actually do that for you. So I'll give you an example. The city smart street lights. So we're going to put 9,000 potentially new lights, smart lights throughout the city. There are a number of private companies that are willing to do that for us in exchange for selling rights of way on the light posts to telecom companies. So the answer is yes. But I think also down the road when you start opening or enhancing parks, streetscapes, there's always opportunities for sponsors. But the dollars aren't huge in those cases, but they do help defer maintenance costs. So it is a way for us to monetize the assets of the city.
Joy Malikoff, question. When you're looking at adding new parks, are you also looking at each park for water retention so you can combine them and use resiliency within the parks that will be added, such as the Part 3?
Commissioner Malikoff, the answer is yes, yes, and yes. I think it's a really big idea that we have heard now from a number of outside experts. We had a 2-year study from Harvard. We had the Urban Land Institute bring a distinguished panel to us, and they were saying, you know, you've done some good things, but one thing they wanted us to ramp up is the use of our parks and green infrastructure for water retention to help our resiliency. So it dovetails extremely well with what we're talking about. We talked about the Part 3. There are some interesting plans for a major potential new park around 72nd Street. We're talking about the Maurice Gibbs Park. I've heard a little bit of discussion about maybe a park around 5th and Alton. And we have really been beating the drum here. I know I have pretty hard that all parks need to be placed as part of our resiliency program. And it's a wonderful opportunity to dovetail what we're doing in resiliency, hearing from outside experts with this GeoBond.
Hello, my name is Peggy Wiesel. I'm from Mid Beach. And my question is when we're talking infrastructure, as you know, the federal government has been talking about infrastructure, and it's sort of been shelved. But say in 2020 something happens, how will the infrastructure that we're going to be funding here under this bond, would that impact any future possible federal funds?
Great question. The Miami Design Preservation League just had a very fascinating forum on resiliency. They actually had someone from FEMA that came down, and this is just a really good example of exactly what you're asking. And they said, you know, we are thinking about investing in infrastructure, but they want to do it as partners. And so they said, you have to bring projects, and then, yes, you have to bring some skin in the game as well. So I think our ability to do our fair share, to put projects on the table with some capital, will play a very significant role. Another example, the federal funding potentially for transportation projects. That's another one where you have to have local commitment and ideally local funds. And if we're able to show that we have the funds for bus stops, for some of the infrastructure, then we can match that. So I think that's right on, and we will be aggressively pursuing all those opportunities.
Moving forward, in addition, it's absolutely correct. One of the things that the federal government always asks for is, do you have consensus from your residents as to what to move forward with? And do you have a plan and money? So the term shovel-ready, you've heard often, is by doing a project or a GeoBond like this one, is we or you or us will be ahead of the curve when it comes time for these federal dollars to come, because you will already have done the planning and some of the work so that you can say this project is shovel-ready. So if some additional federal funds come in 2020, you'll be first in line.
Good evening.
Yeah, I was just going to say one other thing, because we are in the spotlight for a lot of things, but no doubt, especially around sea level rise. And I think one of the things that we've been viewed positively by so many stakeholders, whether it's other local municipalities, even the federal government, and our bond rating, is that we have taken action, that we've been able to fund some projects and get going. And I think our message to the marketplace is we're optimistic, that we have a community that is supporting us, and that we're in it for the long haul. So I would say this is going to be an important message if we decide to go this path of how the community will back the efforts that we're making, because there will be a lot of eyes on what we do, particularly as it relates to sea level rise and resiliency. Sir, your question.
Yeah, it's William Garcia. How are you? Real happy that we have John Woodruff that's going to be watching over those dollars. We haven't found anybody more qualified and a gentleman to be able to do that. So that's a critical point, and it goes to some of the things that I want to mention in making sure that we got the proper administration and the proper hands and eyes looking out over those dollars. So I'm real happy that John's going to be the one doing that. But my question really is regarding, what comes first when the ballot is out there. I think it's important for people to know what they're going to be voting for. You talked about there's a list, and then the ballot comes in, and it's very specific. Some is resiliency, some is parks. But without the details, I think it's going to be very difficult for the people to vote. So what comes first, the list or the vote?
The list, of course. So, in addition to the charrette, so the charrette's where we get a lot of input, feedback, sort of give and take, cull down the list. But there's, in addition to the websites, you're going to be seeing countless commercials. The city has set aside about $300,000 for information communication purposes. So there will be commercial, radio ads, social media ads. I'm hoping that we'll have 7-0 support on the commission so that we'll have 7 commissioners and the mayor out in public educating voters on what is involved in the GEO bond. So we're going to over-communicate what you're voting for.
But the actual language on the ballot will not include the specifics that were approved from the list.
No, you have I don't know if it's a 30-word limit. Is it 30 words on the ballot? Right. So there's just legal restrictions on what we can actually put on the ballot. So it's not going to have a list of every single project on the ballot because we're just not allowed to. It's going to be limited to 30 words.
Right, the ballot language is limited, so what we're really planning is that once the list is final, we know how much and what are those projects, that the 3 months prior to the vote, we'd be doing a lot of outreach, a lot of social media, a lot of community engagement around what are those projects so that there's a significant amount of voter education there so that folks do know exactly what they're voting on, because it is such a big decision for the community.
The bad news is we've been informed by the county that because of the various state and county and other ballot questions, this and being a governor election and I think an important midterm election, the ballot this year for voters in Dade County is going to be really, really long. So that concerns me, where we're going to go on our own and possibly have 4 or 5 ballot questions, possibly more, the Inspector General, the bonds, possibly some others. It's going to be a long, exhaustive voting process for most voters, come November. That's the bad news.
I'm gonna, if you guys can all squint for a second and imagine that I'm Frank Del Vecchio. He asked me to ask something on his way out, which ties into the questions that you were just being asked. So the charrette process gets you from this enormous list to a more prioritized list of things that are sort of universally agreed upon. How do you get from that list to what actually gets proposed as part of the GEO bond? Who makes those decisions?
The way it works is that we need to make those decisions by the end of July.
That's correct. And we're going to try to make it as easy as possible for voters. I mean, I talk about the GEO bond anytime anybody sees me. And I think all my colleagues, have been doing the same. We want input. We want to see ways we can invest the public's money in things that the public wants it invested in. So we're going to try to make it as easy as possible for folks to communicate with us. And we have to work backwards because the county has told us that, I forgot what date, but it's early August, it's a drop dead date. You have to have your ballot language for anything you intend to have on the ballot because these things have to be printed. You have absentee ballots going out starting in September, etc. So you kind of work backwards. So the drop dead date will be early August, in which we have to submit the ballot language. So we need a couple of weeks before that to finalize the list. So Raul, our city attorney, and his team can draft the ballot language, get it approved by the county, and then pass it on.
So what is the process? Is it something where a 5/7 majority says, yes, this project can be added, or is it 4-3, or how does, from the list, how does it get added?
It's 4/7 vote, I believe. But that's a public meeting. Everyone's going to come, hopefully. As we get the list down, we'll vote on it, and then that'll be it. But, how we vote will be very, very dependent on the meetings and the feedback we're getting from residents.
Right.
So that's how I'm going to vote.
And we've already scheduled one GEO bond workshop near the beginning of this process, so I'm sure we will have at least one, if not 2, before we go final, so that, those are also public meetings that everybody can attend.
Yeah, and look, having seen some GEO bonds done here in this community, and folks up here have done it in other communities, I think everyone should be prepared for you're going to get most of what you want, but not all of what you want. And so just be prepared. You'll get a lot of what you want, most of what you want, but not every single thing, because there is a finite amount of money we should prudently borrow. So we didn't go for the 1.1 billion that was on the list. We're down to about 700 or 800, and we'll get it down from there.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm a resident with a Susquehanna. I have two short questions now. Future commissioners may not be all of you. So what is the obligation of future commissioners to keep the list that you devise and do other things in the same way and carry on into the future?
Well, legally, for example, and I think Cesar brought this up, for instance, if there's, let's say, $100 million allocated for public safety, we can't move any of that money and spend it on something else. For example, let's say a new parks project. So we have some limitation already built in as to we have to stay within that category. One easy way to think about it is if we ever want to get up here again and ask the community to vote on another GO bond, you tend to need to have a good track record, that you spent the money responsibly, that you followed the rules, and so on. And so that's really the true test as we move forward.
And my next question is, have you considered making mandatory roof gardens as other green areas to help us drink up some of the water that we get, particularly for big buildings, office buildings, hotels, and so forth, and making that mandatory?
Thank you for the question. So we are absolutely looking at a range of green infrastructure opportunities, both in public property like parks and what we might do in private property. The short answer is I'm not aware at this point that we've looked at mandating that. So I think the short answer is not at this time, but all options are on the table, and clearly the private property owners have an important role that they can play, and we're open for good ideas.
I have a quick follow-up to your first question, Sue, about the projects that, how can you ensure that they get moved forward? And the important part is the tranches, as John mentioned, that you can't move them around from one need to another. They need to address the need that you've bonded them out for. The specific projects, however, would be in the next phase of the project. Once all of the projects have been, the list of projects have been selected, you would then go out and have actual workshops and charrettes to design or implement the specifics of those projects. One of the methods that we used back in the 1999 GEO bond was what we call the basis of design report, where each consultant or each team of consultants would go out and build consensus around the neighborhood, which is a little bit different than this time, and we would all vote on it, and we would take it to commission, and commission would approve that document, say this is the basis of design, these are the projects, these are generally what it's going to look like, and the commission is bound by those projects moving forward. It's not going to be quite exactly done the same way as this one is because of the different way of thinking of it as elements versus neighborhoods, but it could be very similarly done.
I don't think that you understood her question. I think what she was asking is what happens when the commission changes? Are you obligated to pass it on, or are newcomers to the commission able to just open the door to new things?
There are restricted bond covenants, so there are legally binding uses for these funds. Jumping categories, as John mentioned, will be prohibited. I mean, we would be sued by the bondholders. So you have the protection of just the security documents, SEC investigations, which happen, by the way. Cities do get sued by the SEC. I mean, bad things happen. You have legal protection from the SEC, bondholders, and Wall Street, as to your ability to just take money that was designated for parks and use it for mass transit. Within those categories, there is some flexibility, but that's why we have the GEO bond oversight, which would last beyond the commissioners and help bridge future commissions. And then you have an inspector general, hopefully, which will be a ballot question if that passes, to prohibit potential abuses.
I would just add that while the bond is paid over a 30-year time frame, the actual projects and investments are very front-loaded. So you could expect over the first 5 or 10 years, a lot of these things would have been done. So we'll be making progress early. Of course, we won't all still be here in the same roles, but it wouldn't be like there's this whole long list, someone's going to come in and re-event. We're going to start making progress early, and then projects will be done or midway, and with the checks that have already been mentioned, I think you should have good comfort that the money will be spent the way it's meant to be.
And I'll just add, there'll be a high degree of transparency. We'll really beef up online tools and different things, so it'll be really easy to see, okay, what were the original commitments, where are we, how much have we spent, what are changes, if any, that kind of thing, to increase accountability.
So this leads me to what I think is going to be the last question. The oversight committee team, do you have a vision for how that works yet? Is it going to be part of the vote in November? Is it going to be concurrent? Is it going to be something that's going to be impaneled afterwards? I think there's a lot of comfort to be had knowing that that is not something in the offing. You know, the Inspector General, for instance, is an idea that we all, I think most of us love and are really eager to see happen, but it hasn't yet. And I think there may be concern that the same thing would happen with an oversight committee for the bond. The numbers are staggering. The amount of opportunity for things to go terribly wrong through the process is high. And so can you please, from your respective positions, address how that's going to happen and how it can be assured that's going to happen quickly?
I think it's a great question. As I said at the beginning, I support the GEO-bond, and it needs to be done right. And for me, citizen oversight is critical. So my simple view is that we would have a representative group of residents. In Miami, they had 7, not married to that number, but think a workable team. And I actually think we have an opportunity to improve the way that we plan and execute projects by engaging residents earlier, by engaging residents throughout. So for me, it's an opportunity, and my support for the GEO-bond comes with strong resident input throughout, and I believe the Oversight Committee is going to be part and parcel, so I will work very, very hard to make sure that happens. You have my commitment on that.
Tanya, keep in mind the Inspector General, because it requires a change to our charter, it has to go to voters. That's the only reason it hasn't happened yet.
But, so is the Oversight Committee going to be part of what gets put on the ballot?
No.
The language? Okay.
No. It's all our commitment. You heard it from the mayor. It's something, you know, the mayor will form, we'll all vote on it, and then we'll have appointments, and we'll figure out how we constitute it, whether it's 5, 7, 12, or 13, you know, I have an odd number, 13 people, whatever the number is. But I think you can have unanimous support that we will have a GEO-bond oversight committee. There's no point in putting one together until the GEO-bond passes. If there's no bond, there's no need for the committee. But right after that bond hopefully passes, we'll put together the committee.
One thing about the committee is I would hope that the people will be selected based on certain expertise. You know, that's not like, okay, Commissioner, let's say I need to fill a slot here, this guy, you know, but you know, you want GCs, general contractors, financial people, people really with credentials.
And residents.
Well, that are residents. I mean, you dual, both residents and expertise in some areas so that they can get into the details.
I have to thank all of you. We've had a lot of forums. You were superb. And I think that 5 of you should go on the road for the city, and we couldn't fail if you did so. So lots of love to all of us, and thank you. Thank everybody for coming, and hopefully you got as much information as you could possibly have. So thank you.